I'm going to be demonstrating how to make Grandma Henrietta Spilman's potato rolls. And one of the things people ask a lot about is the potato in the recipe. I've done the potatoes for the recipe a lot of different ways. These were just rinsed off and microwaved. You can also peel them and boil them or bake them. It's all the same. You just need a cup of mashed potatoes. So I'm just gonna peel them.
Doesn't matter what kind of potatoes you use?
Yeah, I've used all different kinds of potatoes. These happen to be yellow potatoes because I like yellow potatoes. I've used red potatoes, russet potatoes, doesn't matter. And actually, if you look at the taro roll recipes, those are kind of similar. They just use taro root in the same way that this recipe is going to use potatoes to add kind of a moisture to the rolls, and they're also a little bit of a denser roll. So that is what's going on. Just peeling them and then honestly mashing them. I have a fork here, but more often than not I don't use it. And then just put it in a 1 cup measuring. It's not very complicated. This recipe is from my grandma Spilman. She had 16 kids. She used to come to visit us. I remember her. And when she came and visited, my mom said she often made these rolls, and she also made apple pie. But when she made these rolls, she made them really big, like the size of a hamburger bun. I don't really ever make mine that big. The only time I do is if I am making them for pulled pork, and then I'll make them big like that. She would make them without a recipe, and then one day my mom asked her to write down the recipe, and she did, and my mom has that original recipe. So this is basically a cup of mashed potato. I don't know why people have so many questions about that, but actually when I share the recipe with people, they ask about the mashed rolls a lot of times. They're literally just mashed up rolls. So that's the first part of the recipe. Next we're going to add this water. I measured 3.5 cups and then put it in the microwave to heat it up. I did about 2 minutes, which will make it too hot. But by the time we add the other ingredients, it'll be good. We just don't want it to be too hot when we are adding the yeast. So what I like to tell people if they don't want to kill the yeast is to, like if you put your finger in it and you think, oh, that's a nice bath water for like kids. It's not like an adult, really hot, sear your skin off your body, but like a good temperature that you would put like a little 2 or 3-year-old. That's perfect. So the water is really perfect right now. I don't know why. I think it was a mistake, but the original recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of yeast. Somewhere along the way I started adding 2, so you can make it with 1 or 2. This happens to be 2. So since the temperature is good, I'm filling it. I'm like, whoa, that's good water. It's not too hot, not too cold. I'm just gonna put the yeast, sprinkle the yeast on the top of the water.
What kind of yeast is that?
This is a rapid, I'll get the container and show it to you. It's just, I think, no, it's not the rapid rise. It's just, this is active dry yeast, not the rapid rise kind. So this just happens to be Red Star. When I lived in California, I bought the big containers of it you can get from Costco. but that's what that is. And I keep it in the fridge. And it calls for 1 cup of sugar. So I'm gonna put that in. It calls for...
Why do you sprinkle it around instead of just pour it all in?
I don't know. Makes me happy. I don't know.
The sugar feeds the yeast.
Yeah,
so
the
it needs
sugar-
contact with all of the
Yeah, the
yeast.
sugar
Just sprinkle the yeast.
and the gluten and the sugar both feed the yeast.
Yeah.
And then this is a tablespoon of salt, and I'm sprinkling it because it makes me happy. And then in the original recipe, it calls for a cup of shortening, which totally works. But I use butter. A lot of times if I've forgotten to get the butter at room temperature, I just nuke it for 10 seconds, flip it, and nuke it for 5, and then it seems to be good enough. But it should be like soft, you know, like I can, not super hard. Yeah. So now we pretty much have all the ingredients in here except for flour. I'm gonna go rinse my hands. So I want to talk a little bit about flour. I've had lots of people call me after trying to make the recipe and they have different problems. This is my advice about flour. I happen to like unbleached flour. I don't buy the bread flour I have used it, but I don't buy it on purpose. So this is unbleached flour.
So it's unbleached, all-purpose.
All-purpose. And then when you're using it, a lot of times in a lot of recipes, it'll say to sift it. I don't really sift it. I just stir it up a little. You're just wanting to get the air. Like, I don't know if you can see this flour. It's really full of air. It's not really compacted. It's like really
Fluffy.
Fluffy flour. So that's what you want. And the recipe tells you to add in 4 of the 12 cups of flour.
So you don't pack it down.
Yeah, not packed at all. It's just, I'm just sliding it off the top so it's kind of flat. And then we got our 4 cups. And we're going to get a fork and just stir it. And kind of smash in the butter and the rolls.
Can you do this with a mixer?
Yeah, actually, up at girls' camp when we were making these, we used the mixer. But I never really have in the home. I just always do it by hand, and if I have to do a lot of batches of these rolls, I just do a lot of different bowls of rolls. So.
Have you ever tried using a hand mixer?
No, but I don't think it would hurt it to do that. I think at this point you're just trying to mix it all up.
Yeah.
And I think the bread machines would just, you know, you would dump in all these ingredients and then you would, you know, it would go to town mixing it with its bread hook, and then it would do all the sitting and everything in the... So this is what this looks like.
So you're mashing in the butter and everything.
And the rolls and everything. And can you see the top of what that looks like?
Yeah, I zoomed in.
So
Butter and the potato and the...
what we're going to do is we're going to actually follow the recipe. If you look, there's not a lot of bubbles on top of this. And we're going to wait and we're going to let it proof. A lot of times I'll skip this phase because I think originally when the recipe was made back in my grandma's day, I think yeast was a little more fickle. I think now, as long as you have the right temperature of the water, I don't think you can wreck it. So I usually mix this and then I'll add in the balance of the flour, or if I'm making multiple recipes, I'll mix this bowl and set it aside, and the next bowl and the next bowl and the next bowl. And then I'll come back to the first bowl, and then at that time you'll see that there's a lot of little bubbles on top of the surface of the dough, and you know that it's working. The yeast is working, you didn't kill it, you're good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and wait till we got a lot of bubbles just to show you what it looks like. Okay, we're back now and we have our dough that's proofed. You can see that it's got bubbles in it and it's kind of got a rounded look to it. It's definitely risen and the yeast is working and we didn't kill the yeast, so it's looking like it's ready to add the balance of the flour. So we're just going to start adding what's left of our flour. The original recipe calls for 12 cups. We've already added 4, so we have 8 cups left. So we're just getting our flour that's got a lot of air in it. It's fluffy. We're just leveling it off on top and adding in, we have 8 cups left. So we're going to add in 7 cups to the bowl. And for that last 8th cup, we're going to set it to the side and use it to knead our dough. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about is that this is what's left of 5 pounds of flour. So if you're wanting to make this recipe, it takes about 5 pounds of flour with a little bit left over. All right, so next we're going to be kneading this in, and I don't like to get my hands super sticky, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I knead the flour into the dough and what that looks like. So a lot of times I will use a dough scraper during this. I don't happen to have one right now, so I'm just going to show you what you would do if you didn't have a dough scraper. I'm just using a fork and mixing this all in and getting it just mixed up with all the flour that's in the bowl mixed in with the dough, and it's getting stiffer and stiffer as we go. If I had a dough scraper, I would mix with a fork for a while, and then I would get the dough scraper at this point and just start scraping the sides of the bowl and using it to mix with. So this is what it looks like. It's a pretty thick dough at this point. And now we're going to go ahead and get our last cup of flour, the 8th cup. We're going to spread it out, and then we're going to take our mostly mixed dough and put it down on the flour and start kneading it on the table. Since I don't have a dough scraper, I'm just going to go ahead and scrape everything down in the bowl with my hand. If I had a dough scraper, I would scrape it with the dough scraper. You're going to put the dough back in this bowl, so you want the bowl to be pretty clean of the dough, and plus you can just use the rest of this dough in your recipe. So we're going to just keep scraping everything out of the bowl, adding it to our dough over here, and we're going to start kneading it, and eventually it'll go back in this bowl. So one thing I want to tell you about kneading the dough is you don't want to get your hands all super sticky and covered with dough. So see how there's flour down here on this section of the dough? I'm going to take the dough that's covered in flour and press it down with my hands, and then I'm going to turn the dough. And I'm just going to do that over and over. I'm taking the dough that's covered in flour and pressing it down, and then I'm turning the dough. And I'm just going to keep doing that and adding in the little bits of dough that have not all become cohesive. Add them in, turn it, and again, every time I'm grabbing sections of the dough that are covered in flour so that my hands aren't going to come away super sticky. And I'm just going to do that. the original recipe called for you to knead the dough for 10 minutes. I have kneaded the dough for 10 minutes, but I actually don't always do that. Just a lot of times we'll knead it till it feels like it's pretty well mixed. If you had a bread machine or a mixer, that's what would be happening. You know, if you had it in your bread machine, it would be being kneaded by the dough hook. But I've always just done it by hand, and it's not going to hurt you to take a look at a clock and go, okay, I'm been kneading for about 8 minutes. That's good. You can't hurt it by kneading too much. So we're just gonna knead the dough. Okay, looks like our dough is looking good and we're ready to be done kneading it. I guess the best comparison I've ever heard is you want your dough to look as smooth as a baby's butt. So that's what we got here. We're just gonna pick it up, put it in the bowl. I don't grease the bowl or add anything into the bowl. I just plop it right back in there. And I'm going to add some saran wrap on top of it. Some people cover it with a cloth. I have done that. There's nothing wrong with that, but I guess I'm just used to using the saran wrap. And I'll just put it over the top, and we're going to get it covered so that it can rise. If you don't put saran wrap or a cloth over the top of it, what you wind up with is a crust on top of your dough that you're not going to want. Okay, so now that we have our dough all done, we have it covered, we just need to let it rise. And depending on the temperature of your house, it usually takes about an hour. Some people will do different things to try to help it be warm and to rise, set it in the sun, or I think I've heard of people putting it in on their dryer. We're just going to set it on our counter and let it rise. Okay, we're back with our dough. It's risen really well for us. We actually probably left it too long and it rose a lot. This is probably more than it needed to rise. We had a little lunch break in between, and now we have our beautiful dough that's risen perfectly, and we are going to punch it down. And some of my kids take that quite literally and have just punched it, but it's not necessary. You're just basically collapsing it so that it can rise again. And this is really heavy dough, so you want to have all these times that it rises. So we're just going to smash it all down. We're going to go around the bowl, pressing it down, getting the air out so that it has a chance to rise again. And that's going to help our doughs, our rolls be nice and fluffy, even though they're kind of a heavy dough. So we're going to cover it with the saran wrap again and let it rise for probably another hour. Okay, so we're back and we're ready to work the dough onto the pans. So these are bun pans. I have 3. One batch will make 45 rolls. And I have some butter for the pans and for my hands. And then this is something I purchased on Amazon because they also make me super happy. They allow you to make a lot of rolls without using up all your counter space. So you can put quite a few pans on here, and then you don't have to have them spread out all over your kitchen. So I like these a lot. And I'm going to go ahead and show you working them onto the pan. So I'm going to take my first pan and just put a tiny bit of butter on it. And again, my grandma, you know, probably used shortening for all this. But we're just using butter. And then we're just gonna, so I have butter on my hands just from greasing the pan. Now I have a lot more, but we're just gonna pinch off dough. I really have no idea why I make rolls this way, but this is how I do it. And I've actually watched some videos online of other people making rolls. They don't do it like this, but I make it flat and then I pinch it all together. I decide if it's the right size. Let's roll. So that's pretty much flat. Pinch it together and try to make them as uniform as possible because you want them to cook evenly. So I just do a pattern of three, two, 3, 2. And after we make all of this dough into rolls, then we're gonna let them rise and then cook them. So I would say these balls that I'm making are about the size of a racket ball. What would you think? I think those are...
Yeah, about that size, a little bit smaller.
So this is 5, 10, and I just need 15. And as soon as my hands start to get super sticky, I'll just get a little more butter. You could also just get a little more flour. I do actually have some flour left over. So you can do either. Both work. To just put some flour on my hands. Again, you're just flattening it, pinching it, trying to get it to be, and then I know that they're gonna work out good to just have 15 on the pan. So
if they rise up and touch each other, is that okay?
yeah, sometimes I'll make them bigger. I have on occasion made them a tiny bit smaller when I didn't have, I wanted to get more rolls out of a smaller amount. The problems that I've encountered is, so let's say I'm making, 500, 250 rolls, something like that. And I just have batch after batch after batch. Then if I'm cooking them, I can only cook them one at a time. Then I have, sometimes by the time you get to those last rolls, they're like as big as your head.
Because the yeast is still...
It's still rising. So it's probably better if you're, it's probably better if you're going to make a ton of rolls to not make 10 bowls of rolls and then have them all going at the same time. It's better to like make 2 batches of rolls and then, then make another batch of rolls so that everything's more staggered. But I'm usually like, no, I don't want to, start over again. I just want to make them all at the same time. So,
because you're saying the amount of time to cook these rolls overall is 5 hours.
Well, from start to finish, it takes 5 hours. Just because around 5 hours. That's not time that you're working the whole time. It's just the time that if you start, if you start the rolls 5 hours later, you'll have all the rolls baked. And the only time you're really working very hard is when you're putting in the ingredients, when you're kneading, and then when you're making the rolls. The rest of the time is just, you can go about your day and do whatever. Or sleeping. I'll do it sometimes at night where I'm sleeping. I'll get up, I'll punch down the dough, or I'll get up in the morning and punch it down. So it seems labor intensive, but really it's more a lot of time spent waiting for them to rise and you cook them the same way the original recipe says, 375 for, depending on the oven, 13 to 15 minutes. You want them to be not overcooked on the bottom and not too brown on top. So that's pretty much it.
Can you fill those? Can you put stuff in those?
Yeah, I haven't really ever tried to do that. I will mention I did pick out like a big plump of potato, and you probably noticed when I made the rolls that I really didn't care much about clunks of potato or clunks of butter or whatever. I just, by the time you knead it a bunch and punch it down and make it into rolls, there's just not, like, that's the only little bit. And actually I could have just left that in there. So again, I'm just doing, 3 sets of 5. So that's done.
And these over here look like they're already starting to rise a little bit.
Yeah. But the other thing I would say is, most of the time when people mess up this recipe, it's because they didn't have the time to let everything rise. Because it's a heavy dough, so if you're not letting it rise as many times as it's telling you to, then you're probably going to wind up with something that tastes pretty decent while it's hot, but then by the time it's no longer hot, it's just it's too fat and heavy and thick to really enjoy. So you just have to let things rise and be patient. One of the things I've done in the past is, if I'm trying to rush some rolls, then I will, if I have a double oven, I will turn on the upper oven to as low as it'll go, and I'll put the a pan of rolls in there and let them rise in there, and then put them in the lower oven to cook them. But you have to be aware that if you do that, the bottom of the rolls that are rising get a little bit cooked, so you have to just take that into account when you're cooking them. Maybe put them a little higher in the oven, or just maybe don't cook them as long.
So you said you can use this for pizza dough?
No, you could use this for pizza dough. I don't, because I have a pizza dough recipe. You could use this for cinnamon rolls, which is the other thing that my kids make a lot of. Actually, Nathaniel, my son, came down here and was wanting me to make these into cinnamon rolls. And I told him no, we were making a video. But sometimes like you could do half rolls, half cinnamon rolls. And I had never actually seen anyone use, so this is a pretty classic German potato roll. It's not anything special. And I was watching one of those cooking channel ones where they travel around and eat really good food at different places. And someone was using a potato roll dough and making cinnamon rolls. I was like, oh, look at that. How cool is that? So we're not the only ones doing that. So we'll see if our figurine comes out good. I think I may not have exactly 45, but we'll have close.
You're pretty close.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually perfect. And the reason why it came out to 45 is because I have made these rolls so many times. Now we're gonna let them rise.
How long do you let them rise?
Probably about an hour. Same thing. So
this last one, it wasn't an hour when you started doing this.
no, probably because we let them rise so much
Before.
the first time. So,
Okay.
all right.
It's a terrible oven.
But our rolls are pretty much ready. They'll raise some more in the oven. 375 in the oven, probably about 13 to 15 minutes, depending on your oven. If you have to bake 2 at a time, I would put 2 in, and then I would set your timer, and I would not only switch the trays, but I'd turn the pans halfway through. So that's my advice.
All right, so we have the oven set for 375
Yeah.
on just regular bake, no convection oven, just a cheapo oven.
Yeah, super cheap.
Super cheap.
This is the worst oven. And you can't even open it because we have this massive fridge in the way. So it's in the middle. That's it.
So you do one at a time.
Yeah. Like if I'm in a hurry, then I'll do where you put 2 in and switch them and turn them.
But
Halfway through.
right now you're not going to turn them at all. You're just going to
Yeah, put them in.
put them in and bake it for.
Yeah. I'll set this for 13 minutes. So that's it.
Boom.
Ta-da! So I wouldn't use, this is a cookie pan, I wouldn't use these, not because it doesn't have a lip, but because this is especially for cookies, because you don't want cookies to be super brown on the bottom. You want a cookie to be sort of cooked really evenly all throughout, and you don't want it to have a super cooked bottom. Whereas with the roll, you do want the roll to have this bottom. And it's even kind of good that it has a little bit of butter on the pan, and it makes it good. So, yeah, that's the roll.
Is that the term of a vegan?
Butter? Yes.
Butter makes it good.
Mo butter, mo better. But these are pretty warm, but you can see they're good.
Steam.
Oh. That looks like we need to get some barbecue and put it right in there.
Get some butter. Or jam. So,
All right.
anyways, that's it.